particular chapter on spirituality, the spiritual dimension of family life, Froma Walsh has incorporated her own chapter into her book, a collection of chapters by different theorists. Spirituality is embedded in culture and ethnicity and in personal experience and what we believe existentially about ourselves, about our lives, about our families. Understanding religion to be an organized belief system that includes shared and usually institutionalized through churches or synagogues, temples, mosques, moral values, beliefs about God or a higher power, involvement in a specific faith community with rituals and practices. Spirituality is more transcendent in a more overarching moral construct with beliefs and practices. It can be experienced either within or without institutionalized, ritualized behaviors. It's an active investment in an eternal set of values and fosters a sense of meaning, wholeness, harmony within self and connection with other self in the community. The essence, what we believe, do we believe our body carries our soul and spirit around? Do we understand our soul to be our mind, emotions, heart, beliefs? Do we understand our spirit to be that part of us that allows us to talk, to communicate, that is eternal, that is no longer present once our physical body dies? And what happens at that point? Does something happen? If it does, what is it, and how do we understand that to be part of our lives? To intertwine spirituality and family functioning, how do we communicate this to our children? How do we ensure or accept that our children may or may not follow our own family values, moral values, spiritual values? Do we structure our relationships with partners who share those or who do not share those? What happens with remarriages? What happens with spirituality across family life cycles when our spiritual belief systems are then challenged by divorce, by death, by problems with our children? How do we ritualize it with bar mitzvahs, with baptisms, with christening? The Jewish community, how do we work with Jewish families with high rates of interfaith marriages in recent times? The Jewish identity, the Jewish faith. How do we work with Buddhist or Muslim families in a changing system? How do we work with Christian families who feel like their faith systems are being challenged in our particular social dynamics of this time? What do we do with multicultural faith systems? What is the answer for our families within sort of the huge choices across ethnicities of religious preference? Native American families, Hispanic families who tend to go back to natural systems, to animistic systems. What are our common beliefs and practices? How are those things understood to be non-pathologized, non-diagnosable, but simply differences across families? With prayer and meditation and understanding of a supreme being, God, Allah, Jehovah, Jesus, rites and rituals, how did our faith system help families through impossible situations like the death of a child or chronic family illnesses or war and losses and grief and divorces, and to connect with celebrations and tragedies across human experiences, birth, death, loss? How does that affect patriarchal and sexist and heterosexist interventions in families and belief systems in families, and how we cause our families to work? What are interfaith boundaries and tolerances that are changed by marriages? Some religions have prohibited interfaith marriages, strongly discouraging people from even dating someone outside their faith, and yet it continues to happen. And many of those children are raised in families that either embrace both faith systems, adhere solely to one faith system, or give up and abandon both and choose to have no real faith system. And is it important? How does that affect our belief around abortion, around adoption, around faith and intimacy, around sex, around cultural changes, acculturation, assimilation, isolation. So, and do we find ourselves going back to our embedded faith systems as we go older, or as changes and heart tragedies come, or as children are born? What are the clinical implications for both the sacred and the secular? Do we shy away from spiritual issues? Do we include them? Do we wait for the client, which is what the ethics codes say, the client to bring it forth? How comfortable are we talking about spiritual issues? How knowledgeable are we? Do we send those clients out or refer them out? Do we refer them to their community and faith-based systems for that portion and say things like doctors are able to help us medically, counselors are able to deal with emotional, mental, psychological, social issues, and ministers deal with spiritual issues? Do we make a division? And I'm not saying that any of the answers are right or wrong. What I am saying is that those answers have to be answered with us first before we can go forward, that we have to know where we stand and who we are prior to being able to handle families that may desire to incorporate spirituality in both family assessment and family treatment. If we believe in a multisystemic approach, do we then dissuade families from seeking spiritual answers to their problems? Do we close those doors? If we're looking at spirituality as a part of this cultural dimension, how do we handle that? How do we understand families that incorporate spirituality through class, race, poverty? What are the health benefits of faith? What are the benefits for families going through grief and suffering or injustice, spiritual distress? What happens to families who are unable to retain a faith system that's been very important to them, and then their meaning of life begins to take a great impact, negative impact? What happens with recovery from substance abuse and addiction, with many of the 12-step programs very much embedded in the concept of spirituality and looking for a power higher than themselves to help? So how do we address families who have come from very oppressive backgrounds, who their response to their faith system has seen them through this, then are looking at children who have a lack of investedness in spirituality? All these questions are exactly that. They're questions. They're investigatory questions for the counselor to settle first, and then to help families assess tentatively and respectfully where they stand in the issues of spirituality, what they're looking for, what they want, how we can best help them, and how we know to do that. So, thank you guys.